to do roll call. Troy Hill said he's going to be a little late, but he'll be on in just a minute. He just texted me. All right. Let's go ahead and do a roll call if you would, Nate. And we'll probably have a couple more people join as we come in, but be a good idea to go ahead and get started, I think.
Yeah, that's fine. And I can just check the attendance tracker later and log.
Perfect. Excellent.
All right. We'll go ahead and start. Last name alphabetical. Nicole Bailey. I don't see her on. Andrea Trevor-Flora.
Here.
Okay, thank you. John Conley.
Here.
Thank you. Leonard Dittman, he actually just emailed me and said he was going to be a little late. So we'll see if he comes in. Trevor Forbes.
Here.
Thank you. You said Troy Hill was going to be a little late. Jim Howes.
Here.
Thank you. Nicole Lawless.
Here.
Thank you. Michael Pierce.
Here.
Thank you. Greg Prunsky.
Here.
Okay. Brandon Rich. He actually emailed me that he was not going to be here today. He had a substitute he had designated named Rocky Sundling. Is he present?
I don't see him.
Yeah, I don't see him either. Okay. We'll see if he comes in. Let's see. Jeffrey Reister. I believe I see you.
Here. Yep.
Thank you. Nathan Riley, that's myself. I am present. And Joyanne Rusha, she sent me an email and said she was going to be about 20 minutes late. All right, I think that's everybody.
Awesome. All right, let's go ahead and I hope everyone was able to see the minutes that we sent out. Also, Nikki, thank you so much for doing that. Each meeting, I know that is some work, so we really appreciate you getting those meetings together for us. It's awesome. So unless anyone has any questions on the minutes, I would like to ask for first motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Motion.
All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second that.
Awesome. No objections. All right. Minutes from last meeting are approved. Okay. I've just got a few, I guess, administrative items I want to remind everyone on or inform you. So the towing related legislation that was just passed has changed. Well, there's a few things that impact us as a task force. One, it has changed the date that we are required to submit a report to the Public Utilities Commission from September 1st to November 1st. And then the Public Utilities Commission will still have to turn around and submit a report on December 1st. Is that right, Nate?
That's correct. I would also just mention that even though they gave us a 2-month extension on when that first report is due, there is an additional layer that we're going to have to look into beyond the initial scope that this task force started with.
What's that?
It's some kind of comparison. Hold on, I just had the bill up. So in addition to our two primary duties and powers, which were listed in the statute from before. They added, we are also to analyze and make recommendations to the commission about non-consensual towing rates charged to the public, which is pretty much what we're already doing. In analyzing non-consensual rates, the task force shall take into account current consensual towing market rates and their relationship to non-consensual towing rates. So it's just an extra layer we have to make sure that we're considering.
Okay, yeah, that's right. My interpretation is basically like they're just saying that as you're doing this, take into account what people are paying for consensual towing rates, I guess,
Yeah.
is what that means.
One other little minor caveat just to mention is in that report that the PUC does to the legislature, it wants us, the PUC, to include the task force's definition of consensual tow and non-consensual tow, almost like they want us to come up with those two definitions. Even though it's not specifically stated in our duties and powers, just based on what that report is supposed to entail from the PUC to the legislature, it's almost like they want the task force to come up with those definitions. At least that's how I read it.
Yeah, I read it that too. It's like implied. It's ironic though, because the new law actually explicitly provides that definition from the lawmakers. So I don't really know
That is interesting.
what they want from us. But regardless, I'm sure that will be easy for us because I suspect we'll all agree that the definition is as it always has been for eternity all over the United States, which would say non-consensual tows are law enforcement tows and private property tows, and consensual tows is basically everything else. But obviously we can address that in our report. All right. So let's see here. Nate, do you have any admin items for us?
I do. Just a couple things. I appreciate everyone who has gotten their affidavit to me. I appreciate that. So far, I've received 10 of the 14 members, and that includes myself, John Connolly, Leonard Dittman, Trevor Forbes, Jim Howes, Nicole Lawless, Michael Pierce, Greg Prunski, Brandon Rich, and Joyanne Rusha. So if I did not mention your name, I do not have it yet. So if you wouldn't mind, I sent that out, I want to say 2 months ago for signature. It's just an indication that the department has onboarded all the members, including the training from that first meeting that we had, that we have your state email set up, all the things on that list. So if I didn't call your name, there should be 4 people there on that list of that I haven't received. If you wouldn't mind signing that and getting that to me ASAP, I'd really appreciate that. The department wants us to link that into some of our internal appointment documentation for the different boards and commission that the department regulates. So would definitely appreciate that. Just kind of as an aside, before we get too deep into our conversation, I wanted to mention that I got with my deputy director and we were able to locate the cost models that were used through the previous task force. For anyone who wasn't in attendance at the last meeting, we had talked about putting something like that together for whenever we might want to start inserting some new data into there. So we were able to locate those spreadsheets. It's actually like 10 or 12 spreadsheets that are broken out by classification of the towed vehicle. So kind of like the current rates are broken out by GVWR of the towed vehicle. It looks like it's broken out like that, but then there's also kind of a consolidated master list that looks like it's pretty well broken out. I'm not sure how they insert the data into here, but it is something I think we can use in regards to, if we're going to be pursuing reaching out to towing carriers to get some of their financial information, we can at least, if not use this model directly, we can use it as a framework for how we might want to set one up ourselves. So it's a good resource that I think we can use. I have it. I can circulate it if we think that's appropriate, or whatever we want to do. But we were able to locate that, so I have that, and we're ready to use that in whatever way is best. In addition, I also ran by, and again, this was based on our conversation in the last meeting. We had talked about how we might solicit that information from the towing industry, and I was asked to check and see if the information the PUC holds for the different active towing permit holders if we would be okay making that like email information available for the different carriers, so we can almost do like a blast or some kind of a listserv to send out that solicitation for data. And I got the okay from our director yesterday that we are comfortable sharing that. So that is also available to us.
Okay. Nate, one quick question. The model and the spreadsheets and stuff like that from previous task force, and actually that stuff's awesome. Just so you guys know, like there was economists at the PUC involved, and so there's like it was a really in-depth analysis. Is that something we can basically post on our task force website so it's like publicly available to folks, or no?
I wouldn't imagine that we couldn't. I think it
Or
already
should we? I guess is my question.
Well, I think it's already part of one of our rulemaking records. I'll go and double check, but I think that when the towing task force made those recommendations, it was as part of a rulemaking dealing with towing rates, but other towing related regulations as well. And so I think there's snapshots of it already in the record. The only problem was we wanted to try to track down the actual data sheet that we could use again. And so that's what took us a little longer to find, but we did find it. So
okay, gotcha. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess it is already publicly available. Someone could go look at the rule.
I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay, good. Perfect. Yeah, Nate, actually, that would be, I think, if you could send those spreadsheets to everybody, that would be really helpful, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I'll double check just to make sure that's public, but I don't see an issue doing that, at least at the front end.
Okay, great. And actually, that's going to segue into a couple just kind of observations or comments I wanted to throw out there before we kind of open it up. It is probably unreasonable and an impossible task, given the format in which we have to operate this task force. In other words, like we can't talk to each other outside, and we have this very limited amount of time on Zoom to do it. It is probably unlikely that we would be able to come up with recommendations from scratch using like an in-depth analysis and get opinions from economists and all these things you would need. So I think that anything we do is going to have to use previous studies that have been done as like a starting point. Like we're going to have to use that as a benchmark, and then decide if looking into deviations off that benchmark makes sense. For us to all kind of start from scratch over the next few meetings on Zoom for 2 hours a month, to expect that we're going to come up with something that like makes any kind of logical sense, I think is not a reasonable ask. So just kind of throw that out there. And the other is, as we're open up the discussion, the House Bill 221314 will, I think it goes into effect on August 10th. The governor signed it yesterday. Will fundamentally change the way rates are structured. So not the amount of the rates, but fundamentally what's being charged for over what time period and stuff like that. And so it's kind of like we're not comparing apples to apples anymore. And it's the bill's quite long and complicated. And so if anyone has any questions over what that bill actually does in practical terms for towing company rates, I think that discussing that, and I'd be happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability on that, would be within the realm of things we can talk about, because it's something that very directly impacts rate structures. So just throwing that out there. But with that, I will kind of stop and open it up for anyone who has any comments, questions, or things that they'd like to discuss. Mr. Pierce.
Thanks. I just wanted to circle back to the idea of posting the information. So Nate, just a quick question: is that the document that was part of the 2016? I believe it was a rulemaking hearing, and I think that was when the towing task force recommendations were put in, and it was part of a packet of information that I have that looked like it was a spreadsheet of data. Is that what you're referring to? Is what you pulled up?
Yes, because again, I believe somebody mentioned it in our last meeting, how there was some type of a snapshot of like a spreadsheet or something that the towing task force had submitted in one of those previous rulemakings. And so I think I went and found it and downloaded a copy of it. And then I reached out to our deputy director, who handles a lot of, she's more well-versed in some of our historical documentation than I am, because this thing was put together before I was in the position I was, so I wasn't part of it. But I saw a picture, and it's like, yeah, it looks like this is the spreadsheet that they used to compile all the data and come up with some of these figures, and so which ended up being the recommendations. And so again, I seeing it in a snapshot was fine, but I actually wanted to find the documents themselves, and that's what we were able to track down. So it looks like it's the same data as was inserted into the rulemaking, but instead of being a snapshot, it's the actual spreadsheet that we could potentially use if we were to get a fresher set of data, if we wanted to use some of the same data points, or at least reference them if we want to just create our own. That's what I think we could use it for.
Yeah. Okay. The part two of that is, even though it is publicly accessible, people would have to know how to find it, and the only way really to find it would be to know which hearing to go to access the link that I think John sent out as part of the primer, and then get to that actual hearing to be able to see that data. So my sense is that it would be useful for any public participants to see either the spreadsheet or the snapshot, so that it's readily accessible versus having to go through kind of an arcane search strategy to find it, which most people just won't know to do. I think it would be nice to have it more accessible.
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting at. I think the snapshot, personally, if it's just people looking at the website, I think the snapshot is fine. Having it in its actual accessible and editable, spreadsheet format, that's something I don't know that the public necessarily needs access to. But at least seeing what it looks like, seeing what information is in there, that kind of was what I was thinking. AG Roberts, do you have any comments on this?
No, I agree with the conversation so far. No problem, Nate. Thanks for asking.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's all for me for now.
Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, Mr. Pierce. All right. Anyone got anything else they want to talk about to start up the conversation? Oh, Mr. Connolly, I see your hand up.
I sent that to Nate. I don't know if that went to the whole group or not. I'm email illiterate when it comes to.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and just I'm going to post it into the chat here for everybody to access, just so everybody knows
Okay.
what that was. It's everybody.
So what I did is I just called. There's two record dealers here in Denver, in Colorado, pretty much. One of them is the biggest, Lynch Denver, and I just had him give us a basic quotes for standard towing equipment, basic classes, light duty, flatbed, hook, some medium duties, some light heavies and some heavies, and the lightest rotator that they have. Just give me quotes across the board, standard equipment, nothing fancy, just so that we kind of had a ballpark of where equipment is sitting nowadays. He still hasn't given me the rotators of 60 ton and above, because obviously those are a lot of work to put together. We're probably talking close to $1 million, $1.5 million, depending on how deep we want to go there on those style wreckers. But that kind of helps the information to get us up to date from back in the 2014-15 era. We can take those numbers, do an average, and plug that number into our spreadsheet, and that'll help get our equipment pricing up to par. And then really all we need to do is just start adding the costs that we have, what insurance is, what all those costs were. You start adding those, start changing them numbers into that spreadsheet, and it'll throw the number out at the bottom. It's a pretty easy spreadsheet to do.
I'm going ahead and I'm adding this to where we house all the towing task force information. So it's where we put the minutes and the meetings and all that stuff. Let me see if I can create a link. Give me 1 second, please.
And then of course, I mean, certain tow trucks are designed for certain style of towing. So when we have, if anybody has any questions of like what style tow truck you'd use for what style towing, I can answer that for you to help you get through it if you're stumped on it. For some, it's probably looking like brain surgery. For me, it's just like, everyday stuff for me. So I apologize if I missed something.
Just one other thing. We're also trying to track down the survey or the request for data, whatever may have gone out that was used or at least partially used, to see, just so we wouldn't necessarily have to recreate that survey that we potentially would send out to towing carriers to get some of this data. We haven't found it yet, but I'm inquiring about that. So hopefully that's something we can locate, just so we wouldn't have to recreate it from scratch.
Yeah, the
Well,
one.
if it helps, I've got a copy of it. So if you go to the hearing, if you go to the 2016 hearing where the task force recommendation was made, if you follow some of the links, the supporting documentation includes the survey. It includes the Utah task force report. It includes, I want to say, the administrative review of towing costs. Yeah, I can display it to us all too, if I could have sharing. But yeah, it's part of the 2016 hearing literature.
Okay, I'll take a look. I should be able to find if it's there. I didn't realize it was there. I can probably find it.
Yeah, I think there's we can fine tune that some from the problems we had the first go around, because a lot of things can change in that spreadsheet drastically. So from company to company, if you had a company that did 2 tows a day versus a company that did 20 tows a day, you could see a huge difference in price, but there was never a calculation on how many employees you had to do the same amount of tows. So there were certain things we missed in that first go around, like did you man employees 24 hours a day? There was none of that was ever considered. It was trying to get more of a tow count. State Patrol had come in and said how many times tows were requested. So we were trying to figure out, if everyone's doing 1 tow a day versus they're doing, 200 tows a day, there's a huge difference there in the price breakdown and the costs and everything else. So they were going to basics of what the basics were. So there's so much more in depth that was never covered the first go around because we don't have that information. So we had to go off of basic hard costs that you could actually count, right? Like a truck, a property, computers, and it was hard stuff. It never really got into the labor side of things, or the miscellaneous, I should say. So it just depends how deep we want to go down the rabbit hole.
I think a recommendation on how we might approach this in a way that we could actually get something done is, I don't know if it was Nikki that mentioned this earlier a couple meetings ago, but basically asked the question of, okay, I understand we had this set and then we had the CPI increase. And then the question is the CPI increase really the best metric to use? And the answer was like, probably not, but that's kind of what it is, right? And that's what we're kind of using to do these increases. So one thing that I think we could accomplish is similar to kind of what you and Nate and John are both mentioning, is a survey out to tow companies, many who will not respond, but a survey, there's like 700 in the state, many of which just have a permit and aren't actually even operating or towing anything. So out of that 700, there's a much smaller subset that I would call active tow truck operators. And you're not going to be able to, the idea of saying, we'll send out a survey and they'll provide their financial data, and then we can determine kind of what their margins are or something from that. This isn't a tow industry thing. This is just a kind of a like small business type thing. That's like not ever going to work because what different companies use is called a chart of accounts. So how they define different expenses, there's like an infinite number of combinations, right? They might classify something as a truck expense when actually it was maintenance, or they may classify as a truck expense when it was fuel, or labor might be classified as something different. So there's just no practical way to ever like tie that out and be like, this is what financial statements look like for a tow company. That will never work. What I think you could do is you could ask tow companies and you can say, list your 5 largest expenses, because tow companies know that, right? Like they know that, you know, rent, labor, all these things. What are your 5 or 6 or whatever top expenses? And then we could look at those after we get that data and say, okay, out of all the tow companies, they said these are the top 5. Then we could say, is there available, reliable data out there to say how those have increased, right? And then weight them. So I can tell you that rent is going to be one of those. And so we can say, okay, there's data out there that says how have commercial or light industrial property rents increased in like the Denver metro area over the last however many years. The same time frame as the CPI increase happened. Then do the same thing with labor costs directly. And that would allow you to kind of hone in on a normalized or adjusted CPI increase for towing company costs that isn't perfect, but will be closer to real life than just the broader CPI index for what people are paying for milk and eggs and stuff like that. And then we could take that, move backwards to these spreadsheets that Nate's talking about that had already been created, and economists had looked at them and stuff like that, and say, okay, let's apply this new adjusted CPI increase to the rates from 2016 or whatever till today, and now what those rates should be. I think that's something that's achievable, but anything kind of beyond that's more complicated than that, I find it hard to believe we could do. But I'm curious if anyone else has any difference of opinion on that approach. Nicole, Nikki, I think your hand was up first. I think you're on. I think I'm mute, Nikki. There you go.
Yep, I only unclicked the one button, sorry. My comment is that the data that you're going to find is already going to be kind of old and outdated, especially right now with property increases, tax increases, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Unfortunately for all of America, that's a problem right now. Everything's lagging and it's moving so fast. But that's a valid point. But it might be better than nothing, I guess. And if we could implement a process like that, even though right now it might be kind of messy because frankly, like the inflation on all those items is moving so fast that by the time you're able to measure it a year later, it's not really applicable. But if we could implement a process that does that, then maybe in future years, it's at least better than, it's at least closer to real life. It's like never going to be perfect, but it's at least closer than the broader CPI index maybe. But yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing, but I'm thinking that if you had a recent historical date, a set, where then you could try and compare more apples to apples instead of, you know, this one being June of 2019 and this one being July of 2021 or.
Right. Yeah. They won't line up, basically. Yeah. Good point. Joanne, I see your hand up. Welcome.
Hey Trevor, hey everyone. I had a work event, so I apologize for being a little tardy. I just want to clarify, Trevor, are you suggesting that we do the survey, factor in, you know, potential increased costs and do a CPI adjustment? Or because I would push back on doing both. It's almost like double dipping. Your increased cost is also going to be part of that CPI factor, even though yeah, and then I also I just want to remind folks that, like, if the industry has increased costs, obviously, like, our consumers have increased expenses as well. And I want to caution in, you know, us passing on an exorbitant cost to the consumer as, you know, a public service. But Trevor, can you clarify what you meant? Are you looking to do a CPI increase and a additional increase based on a survey? Because I had thought possibly mistakenly that we would only do the survey and kind of start fresh and just put the CPI aside.
Yeah, no. So no, I'm not recommending we inflate it twice. No, basically, like as of right now, the PUC increases it every year according to the CPI index for, like, I think it's the Denver Aurora metro area, from the Colorado Bureau of Labor Statistics, which basically takes the exact same data from the National Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so the argument is, like, maybe that CPI, because it's very broad, it's like a basket of like eggs and milk and all kinds of things that have nothing to do with, a light industrial company or towing, and say maybe that CPI is actually higher than tow companies' expenses have gone up, or maybe it's actually lower. We don't know, but maybe it's not an apples to apples metric. And so what you would do is you'd say, okay, let's ask tow companies what their top expenses are, and then go find, narrow down those 5 expenses and say, let's go find data on how those expenses have increased across the broader economy, and do a weighted CPI specific to the towing industry. So you wouldn't go out and just ask tow companies. You'd be asking people to provide information to increase their rates on self-reported information, which is obviously like a conflict of interest. So we wouldn't be asking tow companies like, how much has this increased for you? We'd simply be asking, what are your top 4 or 5 expenses? And then let's see if we can go find like government data on how those have increased, and see if that provides a better metric for that CPI increase than the actual CPI increase. And I don't know, it might be lower, it might be higher, I don't know. It just depends.
Yeah, so okay, thank you for that explanation. I didn't mean to imply either that anybody was trying to be nefarious or double dip. I misunderstood and came in a few minutes late. I would push back on like a weighted CPI, but I would say that if we're gonna do
Continue on
if we're
Quebec
gonna do
Street
a
for
survey,
3/4 of a
I
mile.
apologize, my GPS is going off. If we're gonna do a survey, understanding, we might not get like the statistical representation that we want, I would ask that we do pay attention to geographic factors, right? Like you pointed out, things like rent and labor costs, that might vary across the state. And I would certainly support weighting some of that, right? So that it's like, more proportional, or, like translates well into like our statewide rate, if that makes sense. But but I am one of many on the committee. I would certainly be open to continuing to like discuss all those options you laid out, Trevor. And I think, at least for me personally, it would be helpful, like after this meeting, if you set some links and references, since we do technically use more than one CPI depending on what it is we're measuring. So some are inclusive for the consumer of like housing, and then but the standard like CPI usually we like exclude that, right? So anyway, I probably took up all my time talking for this meeting. But thanks for filling us in and sharing your thoughts, and I'm definitely interested to to see where this goes and how we set up the math.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Connolly.
I think what we should do is we just got the CPI in place in the towing industry with PUC last year. This is the first of this coming out, right? So there's not a lot of time there. I think what we should do is take the figures that we did in the first task force with that spreadsheet, and we put those numbers in from 2014-15 data, and came up with the recommendations that we came up with. So the PUC then took that CPI, averaged it from 2016 or whatever it was up to current day, which is the current price now. So I think what we need to do is take that same spreadsheet, put in today's numbers, what fuel is, truck costs, property costs, etc. The same numbers that we used the first time, and put those current numbers in, and then see where the number comes up. So that way we can effectively say to the PUC, hey, the CPI is too much or the CPI is too little. Because really we're given the recommendation of where the pricing is. Is the pricing in the par range, or is it way too high or way too low? I mean, that's our goal, right? As a task force. And then we can sit back and say, all right, we did this with 2022's numbers. We came up with this. We found out it was above or below what the CPI is. And that gives PUC their information they need to determine if something else needs to be done differently. Here again, I think it's close, but I don't think it's enough. I mean, I'm in the business, been in the business my entire life, so I think it's close. I don't think it's a perfect scenario, but it is a pretty damn good close scenario. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree. Mr. Howes.
Yes, thanks, Trevor. Being part of the task force prior, I think the best thing to do, and Mr. Connolly just said this, was that let's start with that spreadsheet. The economists went through that. The people on the task force, we went through it, and let's just start with that and see which line items we need to add, or maybe just start there, and then put in the data that from that time to this time, and it's not that. I mean, let's just get the spreadsheet out, and then maybe the next meeting as a task force we discuss the line items and agree, or just kind of come to a conclusion which items on there should be included in our new spreadsheets.
Yeah. I agree 100%. I mean, I think that's the only practical way to do it right now. Joyanne, I see your hand up.
I apologize. I forgot to put it down. I'm good.
That's all right.
Thanks,
No
Trevor.
problem. Yeah. Nikki.
So I'm just curious if the data that's on the spreadsheet, having not seen it, is this all survey related, or is this going to be things that we can input based off of today's market prices?
We had inputted off today's market.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So,
And then I think while we're doing that, when we see the loopholes, like we saw last time, we saw areas of concern, we start jotting those down, and then we build a survey off of those, and then we send that out in the future. And that way, next year when we're doing this, we'll have hopefully some actual industry data back.
Can I ask one more question?
sure.
So in a lot of committees, etc., there's like work groups that do different assigned tasks. You talked about maybe not having enough time. I know Mr. Connolly last meeting had suggested that we may have to meet more often to try and get things done before the due date. But I'm not familiar with the state of Colorado per se, so I was wondering for Mr. Roberts, are work groups permissible, or does the whole committee need to be on board for all of the preparatory work for whatever going into this spreadsheet?
Work groups are totally fine, Nicole. Thank you for asking that.
That's a good question. So just to clarify, Mr. Roberts, so as long as it was kind of open to everyone, my understanding is that me and Mr. Riley or Mr. Pierce could not get together and say, hey, let's work through some math and come up with something that we can present to the committee for consideration during the next meeting, because we'd be meeting outside of this public sphere, and that would be a violation. That was always my understanding. So you're saying that's not the case? Me and Mr. Riley and Nikki and Mr. Pierce could get together one day and say, hey, let's work through some possible math and how we might do this and discuss it, maybe argue a little bit. And then if we come up with something that we like, that we could present in the public sphere. Is that possible? Because I thought that was not.
No, that's totally possible, Trevor. The linchpin on that is that you have to notify the public and make it available. So as long as if if two of you are meeting, that's a meeting under the open meetings law, and you just have to notice it. So any subset of this group can meet as long as you notify the public in advance.
Oh, that's awesome. So for example, I could say like, hey, like we're going to have a meeting, the public can attend. It's going to be at Wyatt's Towing facility, and anyone can show up and observe if they'd like, and we'd be good then, as long as we posted it and everything like that.
Yep.
Oh, well, that could be helpful. Okay, awesome. Mr. Pierce.
Yeah, just following up to look for clarity on that. Let's see, sorry. The public notice sounds like, well, there's two versions of it. We could make sure that we meet far away, up in say way out east at a cafe, so that nobody else can attend. As long as the public notice says where we're going to meet, we're fine. And then there's the nice way of doing it, which would be to schedule a Zoom meeting and have a link, and then any of the board members can attend if they want to participate in the public meeting. So I'm just trying to follow the spirit of the public notice and just see what would be good practice on our part. So we could have a working group, and what seems to me like would be the good way of doing it is to make it a Zoom meeting, and have it accessible to anybody in the public, and as well as anybody on the task force.
Yeah, that's best practice. I wouldn't recommend having it at the Lyman Recreational Center. Yeah, but having it somewhere centrally and have Zoom or some other platform where we can, since we've all been doing this now for 2 years plus, I think that'd be best practice.
Yeah, it's I would say I agree with you, Mr. Pierce, but I would just say as a practical matter, you can look right now and there's no public observing this meeting. So I don't think that there's people beating down the door to make sure that they have a part in the towing task force meetings. So I think as long as we had it, somewhere, like I'd be happy to host something like that at one of our facilities, which is in Inglewood, as long as it's somewhere where most people can get to it. But the fact is that like maybe there's somebody in Durango, Colorado, who's just super excited about the towing task force's work, and they could argue that like, well, it's hard for me to get to Denver to go observe the meeting. I don't think we would have anyone, frankly, show up to a meeting and care unless they were like showing to throw something at me or something, right? But
Yeah.
so as a practical matter, I don't think there's a lot of interest.
Right. Well, I mean, the good practice point though is that we really should be making it available to people if they want to, and make it so that it's not difficult to attend, so that we're not raising any barriers.
Agreed. Andrea.
Hey everyone, thanks for the discussion. I also have the concerns of Joy and just kind of putting in a spreadsheet all the costs of we don't know how much each industry or each company is, what their profit margins are. Like we don't know if some of them have outrageous profit margins that are just adding to that, or like some are probably lower. And we don't know if costs are going up because maybe the demand is going down. Because this industry is very strange. It's kind of like police, right? They depend on people breaking rules, and so if people aren't breaking rules, then this is obviously for non-consensual towing specifically. Then costs may be going up, and so I'm trying to think of how to balance this out with consumer input. I want to think about it a little bit more, because I know doing surveys in general is really hard to get feedback on. And then around geographies, like obviously we're not like, it wouldn't make sense to go with the most expensive geography, like it would have to average out across the whole state. So I'm assuming that's what we'd be doing, but I just want to make sure.
So understood. I guess I would say, Andrea, please keep in mind, and I understand that, given background and the things you care about and stuff, that you might forget this, but a huge part of what we're talking about here is not, I think, what you're thinking about, which is private property towing. We're also talking about costs that insurance companies would reimburse Mr. Connolly for taking a wreck off the road, right? I would encourage everyone here to please take some time and understand that the towing industry isn't this narrow little thing that you care about, that there's other people that make their living doing police towing and pulling cars out of ditches out in the mountains and stuff like that. And that is not, I think, what some of you are focused on. And so please keep that in mind and don't just kind of say, oh, well, it can't ever be that like, people have to pay for anything, because those people you might be talking about are like insurance companies or auction companies or something like that a tow company is charging for a legitimate service they provided.
Yeah, I understand. And also I want to recognize that a majority of people on this board are looking out for certain interests as opposed to consumers. And so I'm trying to balance that out as well.
All right, well, there's only 2 people here who make money from towing, just to be clear. Okay, Mr. House. Mr. Howes, I think you're on mute.
Sorry about that. This is for the Attorney General. I just have a question. I have already started, obtaining data on insurance costs from 2017 to current. And last time during the task force, I had to, actually it was a trucking association person that had asked for actual declaration pages. And we said something about redacting. Back then I could redact the policy holders on these declaration pages. Is that an issue this time around, or?
I don't think so, no.
Okay, so I can provide the back when I come up with the figures just for the insurance items and use actual declaration pages as the backup of it. I can redact the insurance information.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. No problem.
All right, thanks.
Joanne, I just want to be clear. You just made a comment that says, I am hesitant to subsidize one type of tow via fees for another. Consumers pay for police tows too. What do you mean by that exactly? I'm a little confused.
Yeah, so you were talking about like the towing industry. There's different buckets, right? You have, the consensual stuff, like someone got in a wreck, or police tows, or the, non-consensual, like private enforcement. And we understand that. What I was just saying is, I don't want to conflate costs where we can help it, right? Like between one and the other, because I don't want to inadvertently ask one group of consumers to subsidize costs for another group of consumers, whichever. Does that make sense? Trevor, so I understand because of economies of scale, you can't cleanly put everything in separate buckets, but I recognize that there are different types of tows. But what I would not be comfortable doing is saying, well, this, part of the industry, like not related to private non-consensual towing costs so much that we have to, increase the cost for non-consensual towing fees here to justify. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah,
the math will never be perfect and clean because of the industry, and that's not necessarily how accounting works. But I just want to put it out there that, like, we should be careful of that.
Yeah, I don't think that was a suggestion, and just I don't do any police towing, so like, if police towing rates were adjusted to a more fair manner, in my opinion, in other words, like police towers could make a reasonable living, like I wouldn't benefit from that. So it's not like I'm saying, oh, hey, let's like increase police towing so I can like subsidize myself in another area.
And I wasn't making an accusation or anything. That's where you're coming from. I was addressing that some folks do, like, their towing business, like operates in different fields, or like has different services, I should say, right? And then also like with police towing, like I am incredibly sensitive when I hear stories that sometimes operators don't get compensated for the work that they did, that they were required to do. But I'm also sensitive to the fact that, consumers pay for that as well, right? So,
but
anyway,
do you think they should not like should consumers not pay if they're like, if a person gets a DUI and a law enforcement tower has to impound their car because they decided to get drunk and go drive, should they not have to be responsible for that cost?
well, that's a false dichotomy because they're not all DUIs. You know, your car can be stolen. Your car can be, you know, improperly impounded by an officer, which is another conversation. I'm just saying, but even if you had a DUI, it is still a cost to a consumer. So what I'm saying is like, as an individual person on the task force, I am willing to listen and entertain everything, and I'm trying very hard to be like receptive to what you're saying and do my own research. But I just want to remind folks that, like, at the end of the day, consumers are picking up the tab, whether your car was stolen, whether you got a DUI, whether you were improperly parked, you know, in a private lot, right? And so I just want to remind folks that we are also this task force was also created with the intent of protecting consumers as well. And I think there's a way we can, you know, get there, like get to a report or get to a good place in balancing, you know, the stakeholders here.
Got it.
But I'm not trying to suggest that you have, like, you know, I wasn't impugning your motives in my comment, and I hope that I apologize if it came off that way.
It's okay. I understand. I appreciate that. All right. In the wrong box. Mr. Riley.
So the only thing I was going to mention is that obviously the fact that we were able to get our hands on a actual, what appears to be a usable copy of what is you know, in this spreadsheet that one of the previous towing task force used to come up with their recommendations to the PUC in the past. I think it's lucky that we found that, and we should try to use it as much as possible. I would just echo what some people have already said about, you know, even with the extension of 2 months given through the towing legislation, you know, that's still going to sneak up on us pretty quickly. And so I know people have mentioned meeting more frequently or having maybe separate work groups and stuff like that. I support all of that. You know, I'm kind of a, you know, get things done a week before the deadline kind of guy. So, you know, I get nervous when deadlines start creeping up and there's a whole bunch of work still in front of you. So I would just say if we're going to do some kind of a survey, and just so you know, Michael, I was looking in that rulemaking while we were talking, and I didn't see a copy of the survey. I see references to the survey, but I don't actually see a copy of what kind of questions were asked. But we'll keep looking for that internally.
I can point you. I'm sorry, the survey was in a different set of documents, but
okay.
Let me. I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate
it. Let me get the date of, sorry, the actual hearing or the decision number where within attachment.
Thank you. The only other thing I was going to add is if we're going to do this survey, I think we're going to have that survey or whatever kind of questions we're going to ask together, probably no later than the end of the next meeting we hold. Just because we're going to want to give these towing carriers some time to respond, maybe as much as a month to try to get the responses we're looking for. I mean, I'm looking here, and I'm guessing they sent it to all the active towing carriers back in 2015, 2016 when they did this. And of those, it looks like only 73 of the 700 or so towing carriers, active towing carriers we have at any given time. It looks like only 73 responded. That's about 10%. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. I do think we have to do that sooner rather than later. That'll give us time to work out things like the spreadsheet and stuff while we're waiting for those responses. And then we can plug that info in and that data in to the spreadsheet we already have. But again, there's going to be an inherent waiting period to get this data through this solicitation or this survey request. So I just want to make sure we're maximizing our time and we get that out as soon as possible. That was my only comment.
Yeah. I mean, I think fundamentally we have two options going forward this year. Option one would be to get a survey together that says, hey, towing companies, please list your top 6 expenses, right? And then just have them tell us what their top 6 expenses are. Then we get a working group together. I'd be happy to host it. And we'll figure out how we can get publicly available information to see how those costs have increased from 2016 till now. Because basically at the start date of when that structure was put in, and then CPI increased have been haphazardly, but have been applied since then. and then develop, via that publicly available information, a adjusted CPI metric that the PUC could use instead of the, vanilla CPI metric. And then we could present that. We could vote on it, obviously, but assuming we all agreed that we could present that to the PUC as the recommendation is use this metric for CPI adjustments as opposed to the CPI adjustment. That would be option one. That's something I think we could accomplish with a few working groups. Keep in mind that we don't know how that's going to play out. It could be that makes rates lower, frankly, than in some areas of towing than they might already be, or it also could increase them. But if we think that that's the logical thing to do and makes mathematical sense, then we should do it regardless of what we think the outcome is, right? So I can't say, hey, I think that's a good approach as long as my fees go up. No, I can't do that. I have to be intellectually consistent and say, hey, we're going to apply this framework to it, and where the math leads, the math leads. And so if we do something like that, everyone just has to understand that if you have an agenda for where you want that needle to move, you may be disappointed in where the math shakes out at the end. Option B would be for us we can submit a report that says, hey, we don't have enough information. We don't have enough time. Our recommendation is don't do anything. That's a report we could submit to. But I think those are the only two real options for us, given the time we have and the constraints we have. Does anyone disagree or think that there's a third option out there? Mr. Connolly.
I think the option of going through, plugging today's numbers in to the old, versus the old numbers, and given the report of we think the current CPI is high or low or spot on, and we want to continue looking for more data. And at that point, we find our shortcomings, and we put together a good survey that we can send out. We spend some time with it, and we get that information that we can work on, next year or throughout the rest of this year into next year, to where we can have a really good opinion come next fall. Where basically right now we'd be changing nothing. We would raise nothing, lower nothing, and just give them our findings on the current values. The conversations earlier, really, I'm a tower that does everything. I do all areas of towing, law enforcement, consent, private property, you name it, I do it. I tow swing sets, hot tubs. I do everything, beyond everything. I have a cost. As a tower, I have costs. It costs X amount of money to drive down the road. The truck only gets X amount of miles to the gallon. Fuel costs X amount of dollars per gallon. It doesn't matter what that truck's doing. It costs, right? So all we have to worry about is the cost. If we narrow down the actual cost of what it takes to start up a tow truck and drive it down the damn road, right? You have employees, you have fuel, you have maintenance, you have a cost. Now, if you're a smart businessman or a dumb businessman, will determine if you're going to stay in business or not. By where you make your profits and where you don't. There's losses. When you're talking law enforcement, there's lots of losses. There's some losses in private property, but you can gain them losses other places if you're smart. But really, the bottom line is costs are costs. We don't have to play into who's pointing what needle in what direction. Who's worried about? Everyone's worried about consumers. It doesn't matter as long as you cover the cost. If you have a cost covered, everything else is fine. If it costs $10, that $10 has to be brought from somewhere, which comes from a consumer. Obviously, that's with any business. The consumer pays the price. It's our job to say, what are the costs? When I told people a standard 1-ton wrecker was $125, they all told me I was full of shit. Go price one. Okay. I think we're just trying to make this way more difficult than it needs to be. Let's go with basics. Let's plug our current numbers in. We can get current numbers. Everybody can go outside and see what a gallon of gas costs today, what a gallon of diesel costs today. That's pretty blatant right across the countryside. You got an insurance guy here. He can tell you how much it costs to insure a tow truck. We can plug the basic costs in. How much does a tow truck cost? How much is an hourly wage for an employee? You can go off minimum wage even. Here again, basic numbers will tell us the information we need to make it a simple recommendation. And then we can dissect this in more degree as you guys see holes in the system, because there are holes in that, and there's a lot of holes in it. You can shoot buckets in any hole, or put holes in any bucket. That has a lot of different. I think what we need to do is take that and start plugging numbers into it, and you can see it. If everybody gets a hold of that, or Nate, if you can give everybody that link, or I think that's the easiest way is take that link and start plugging numbers into it, and you can see how drastic things change. I mean, it took the PUC bean counters over a year dissecting that only to come right back to the same conclusion. There's a lot of different areas that we cannot come up with. It's just impossible. All we can do is our basic hard numbers that we can find anywhere.
Agreed. Andrea?
I just want to say I'd appreciate if folks don't assume that we don't know that things cost money. I understand this is complicated. I understand there's different costs for everything. I run a nonprofit. I get it. But also, this industry, these companies are not nonprofits. There are profit margins, and they're looking out for those. And I understand that, because if not, you wouldn't do this work. So I just want to make that clear that I do understand those things. And I'm here looking out for consumers. And to your point, Trevor, yes, I know 2 of you profit off of this, but I'm just here to represent consumers, and that's not always the voice at this table. So I just want to say that.
Understood. Mr. Pierce?
Also, just in relation to costs, I think it's super important for us, and especially because of the people who are being towed and the fact that they are bearing some of these costs, to recognize that amongst costs there are ones that have some room for adjustment. So they're not as if they're fixed costs that are unavoidably at the price points that they're at, but rather you can go up or down with them. And so looking at the different factors that have gone into this model, for example, there's a huge range of costs that are variable. Some of them actually they're not contributing that much to be all that much of an issue. But we talked about office furniture, for example. That's one of the contributors. You can spend more or less on that. I was unfortunately aware of a doctor's office that explained that Medicaid, he could not bear his costs for Medicaid. But you looked at his office furniture, and it was easy to recognize why Medicaid wasn't paying his costs. He had incredibly expensive office furniture. So there's a whole lot of room for discretion as to how much of a cost you bear as a business. And 2 big ones that I think that are significant here are the per driver reimbursement rate and the office manager rate. So the rates currently that we are seeing are based upon the Utah study, and then consumer price index adjustment since then. But the Utah study started off with office manager being paid $85,000 a year, and then estimating the proportion per tow of that person's cost. And then an employee rate of 35% of the regular tow rate, which per tow rate at the base level that this was done at, not adjusting yet for CPI, that individual carrier reimbursement rate was just above $50 an hour for that. So those are two costs that I think we can look at it and think they're not fixed. Those are the kinds of things that have some room for adjustment. And if we are looking out and trying to make sure that we're not overburdening the people who are towed, those I think to my mind are open for discussion. So so it strikes me that we need to be aware that, again, these are not fixed. There's a lot of room for discussion on a lot of these.
Right.
Pierce,
and
you're
I
right
think-
on the money. You're right on the money there.
Yep.
I mean, that's exactly where we ended up before, is there are a lot of areas of variables.
So yeah, and that's a great point, Mr. Pierce. That's why kind of my general recommendation is for us to look at kind of the larger expenses, because you're right. Like if we shouldn't look at a tow company that wants to have, like, I don't know, office room tables made of like the redwoods from California or something like that, and consider that a cost that they should be, consumers should cover. 100% agree. But it is not the case that things like insurance, fuel, and rent are variable in the sense that like that a rational operator would just choose to like pay more rent to their landlord, or would choose to pay higher insurance premiums or something along those lines. So I think if we constrain ourselves to like the big ticket items, the 4 or 5 really big direct operating expenses, then again, not perfect, right? But if we wanted to be, if our goal was to be more precise about what metric should be used as opposed to the CPI, I think that's the only logical way to do it that could practically be accomplished, and would avoid, I think, your justified concern of tow companies that maybe have inflated costs because they just choose to like pay their manager, $500,000 a year or something that's like way above market, right? Would generally avoid that. But again, that's just kind of my suggestion. But if somebody has like I think I laid out the kind of what I think our 2 options are. But if someone has a third option, like a real recommendation, not just like, hey, we should consider this, but like, hey, there's an option C, and this is how you would do option C, then I'd love to hear that.
Well, just to follow up too on this point, one of the reasons why the 1314 has put a benchmark of consensual tow rates in there is that you've got some market disciplining of the rates in consensual towing, and so I think that's also I think it's super important for us when we're collecting this data to also compare how much is being paid in the consensual market and consensual in the consensual bucket for paying operators, for example. How much are operators paid on the consensual market? How much are operators? How much are being spent on trucks in the consensual market, and so on. It would be nice to do this, and this is where getting some data from carriers is going to be super important. And I don't know if we're going to be able to get that and do it in a nice way. But a suggestion I have here too is there's I've heard I think John say that some towers don't even want to bother with non-consensual tows, and so they don't. And that to me would be a super valuable group of towing companies, is ones who don't do non-consensual and yet get some information about their costs of doing business and normal pay rates for example for the drivers. Again, these are important benchmarks that I think that are going to serve us well when trying to put in data in our own models.
Yeah,
Well, I can enlighten you a little bit on that. I mean, a tow truck is the same tow truck used for non-consent as it is consent. I don't have different tow trucks for consent versus non-consent. They're the same unit. So your truck's the same. It burns the same fuel as it does doing non-consent as it does consent. The tower, drivers that do non-consent make the same money as the drivers that do consent. You have a pretty standard on what drivers make. It's pretty industry wide in Colorado of the boundaries of what a light duty wrecker operator makes versus a medium duty wrecker versus an equipment hauler versus a heavy duty versus recovery specialist. When you get into your heavy duty recovery specialist, you're talking 100,000 plus a year. If you're talking a basic light duty wrecker operator towing cars under 10,000 GVW, he's anywhere from 35 to 55,000 a year. And that's across the board, whether it's consent or non-consent.
Well, I guess I'm not convinced yet, just because my sense is that in the purely consensual market, the companies that we're talking about are going to be much more receptive to market pressures, and there will be considerable pressure to keep their costs down, and so they're going to find ways of doing that.
Oh, there is.
So,
definitely.
yeah. So what I think, but in the non-consensual area, we're not necessarily seeing that as reflected in
Sure.
In purely CPI adjusted costs.
Well, we can look at like some just a basic black and white things here. So you can take a consent tower, someone that does consent towing, with a tow truck and a cell phone. That's it. They have no employees. They are their own employee. That's a lot of the motor club outfits, the junk haulers, things like that do consent towing. Their expense is simple. It's themselves, their truck, and their cell phone. They don't have a business. They don't have a place of business. They don't have to have workman's comp. There's a lot of expenses that they cut out that, frankly, I cannot compete with. I mean, those are towers I cannot compete with. I'm not even close. I'm double the consent rate on what those consent towers are. But that's the thing. If you don't have the costs, you don't need to make as much money. When you take a non-consent tower, he has to have a facility, and a facility brings in all kinds of different insurance costs, labor costs, insurance costs. Things can get a little drastic there. So, I mean, yeah, you can definitely cut the corners if you just got a tow truck and a cell phone. I know many towers that profit well doing that, and they cut my price by 50%.
Mr. Riley.
So just as an FYI to everybody, I went ahead and added both the worksheet that we've been talking about from the previous towing task force, as well as a copy of a survey, towing carrier cost survey that Michael had tracked down for us. It apparently was part of a different rulemaking back in 2011. I was looking at the 2016 one because I thought that was the survey we would want to use. This is an older survey, but it's interesting if nothing else. So if y'all just scroll to the top of the chat, there should be a link there, and all of those documents should be there if you want to take a look. Thanks.
So real quick, Joyanne, if y'all haven't looked, the chat function, you can just click another button and read over. I want to make sure everyone can jump over so you can see comments folks make. Joanne, I think you make some good points. You said other jurisdictions don't allow fees. Our current model is factoring a manager of $86K a year, well above median income even today. That's true. I don't know that you could have a manager at the median U.S. income, which is, I guess, a broader observation on problems we have in our country, but I don't think we're going to fix that. But I have to have accountants, right? I can't pay my accountants the median income because they're accountants. And so I don't know that paying everyone the median income could work. I'd like it if the median income for everyone in America was just bigger in general. That would solve the problem. But I don't think it would. Does anyone, I'm really interested in hearing if anyone has any, I kind of laid out 2 options we have going forward, because I think we need to start making some plans to actually do something and go forward. Does anyone have, surely somebody here has a real recommendation for steps we can take right now to do something or not do something? I can't be the only one who has options to lay out. Does anyone have any real tangible recommendations to provide at all? Mr. House.
I recommend that we review individually the spreadsheet that we did last time, make changes that we see necessary on the spreadsheet in a discussion in our next meeting, and also pull up the survey from last time and see if we want to, how much we want to change that, and that would be our next step at this point. Just start going through the cost analysis spreadsheet line by line, and that way we can either delete, we can add, and then we'll start obtaining information through the survey and through the I guess the research that everybody's going to do on the task force in their certain areas.
Awesome. Okay, thank you, Mr. House. Ms. Lawless. Oh.
Like Mr. House said, I'm not ready to give up hope that we are too delayed. I know we only have 5 months, but well, probably about 4 if we wanted to come to an agreement before we submitted it. But without having an opportune amount of time to review that survey and also that Excel document and see what information it entails, I'm not ready to kind of say, let's go a different way yet. I personally would like time to review those.
Okay. Anybody else? Andrea, I thought I saw your hand up, but maybe it went down. Guess it went down.
No, I don't.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. If the consensus is that let's just kind of think on it more and circle up at our next meeting in July, then yeah, I support that. So I just some ideas wanted to kind of move the ball forward, but at a minimum, I would agree with Mr. Howe that like for sure everyone should review what Nate sent us, and maybe that'll help kind of frame the discussion. So, Ms. Rusha. Joanne, I see your hand up, maybe. No?
I think she's muted.
Oh, Joanne, maybe you're muted, possibly. She might have a
Just
bad
so everybody knows, in regards to the survey, the one I linked there is one from an older rulemaking, like 10 plus years ago. I don't think it's associated with the task force because I'm pretty sure when that was filed predates the task force. So I'm not sure what that is. Maybe it's something the commission was just doing on its own, not sure. But I will continue to keep hunting for a copy of that survey. And if it's available, I will make sure everybody knows that it's part of that information that you all have access to.
Gotcha. Oh, Joanne just said her mic's not working. She's switching devices. Okay, good. All right. Who else has got something?
Well, I'm trying to, I'd like to think aloud here. We've got some tasks ahead of us. One is to design a survey. And then there's the questions about what to put on the survey. And so before we design the survey and put things into it, I think we're all going to need to review as Nikki brought out, review the spreadsheet of data that we've got so far. And then Trevor, as you pointed out, it's going to be hard to find, to locate the data in a consistent way because of the way that different companies set up their chart of accounts. And so if I mean, crossing over companies that don't have the same kinds of a chart of accounts is going to be difficult. And then finally, I would still like to emphasize the recommendation, because it is now in statute and we need to do a good job of this, is to develop a plan of attack that involves finding data on consensual tows, which have market rate discipline built into them, and so that we have some very clear comparative data. And I think it's vital to the survey process that that a subpopulation that we are surveying are people who do purely consensual tows, so that we're getting models that are working with them. And in response to John's points too, I think it's important that in this survey and the way we stratify the what we're seeking out for within the consensual towing groups that we're talking to, these would need to be companies that have comparable business expenses. So they would have to have, well, I don't know actually. So anyone who's doing purely consensual tows, do they actually have a lot where they have to maintain?
No,
Okay,
there's no
so
requirement.
only companies doing non-consensual tows will also include it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so just, I think this might be helpful, and John he has more experience with this, so he can chime in if I'm wrong. But just so everyone's understand, like, for what you're thinking in your head of consensual, right? Which actually is a much larger thing. Like, some people transport tractors, right, across town, which is different than towing someone's car. But I think what most people think when they think consensual is like, my car broke down and I want to get it taken to the shop, for example, or I broke on the side of the highway, I have AAA and I call and they come take it to my house or whatever. By and large, those are not what you would normally think of as companies. They're generally sole proprietors. I'm not saying some of that work's not done by larger businesses, but there's not large companies with like fleets of trucks and facilities that do like lots of AAA tows, and that's how they make their living. By and large, these are very, very tiny operations. Sometimes one guy in a truck and he parks it like at his house. And generally speaking, the other types of towing are what not large companies, but larger actual businesses with employees and stuff do. Because like police towing requires lots of infrastructure and lots and different types of equipment for different types of jobs and stuff like that. So by and large, the pure consensual guys are very, very small, possibly just sole proprietors. Police towers are usually the largest towers. And then what I would call private property towers, although everyone kind of does a little bit of it often, are kind of somewhere in between. John, would you kind of agree with that? And so that's why it's kind of hard to make a direct comparison.
For the most part.
Yeah.
I mean, you get like your big companies that will do your big dealership towing. A lot of that's gone to Motor Club over the years, but you know, you get a bigger company that'll do things like the Auto Nations and things like that. Normally the little mom and pop repair facility has a family member or a friend or something that is their tower, and they normally have one or two trucks. Not you know, they don't have a place of business, things like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so long story short, I don't know, but Mr. Pierce, if you have a way to get this, I don't know of a manner in which to get good or even decent data from like actual companies that do any type of consensual towing at scale that would have actual financials to provide that information and wasn't tangled up inside of their other types of towing too. I don't know of a good way to get any reliable data on that. But maybe you do. I don't know.
I think easily what we do on our survey is we ask basic questions. You know, how many trucks do you have? Right? That shouldn't upset somebody too bad. what is your consensual rate? What is your non-consensual rate? We just ask the basic questions, and then we can stick those into the categories we want. We can say, okay, one truck operations all go here, many truck operations go there, and then we can kind of look at that information and determine our own little, subcategories to help our information, to help our what we're looking for.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I may be wrong. Like John's right. Like if our survey said like, hey, how many trucks do you have? Because you can kind of triangulate size by how many trucks they have, sort of. And so you could say how many trucks do you have, and it may be that I'm completely wrong. Like there's like a company with 15 or 20 trucks, and then we could also ask them like, what % of your tows are consensual versus non-consensual police versus non-consensual private property, et cetera. And maybe we would get a lot of responses, and maybe there is some data there that
Well, the other thing is like ask how many employees they have. I mean, there are companies that have, 4 trucks, but it's only the owner, he's out in BFE nowhere, Colorado. He's got one large truck, one flatbed, one little winch truck, and maybe a little flatbed or something. And he just grabs the truck that he needs to do the tow.
Yeah.
Well, so to circle back on the where I was trying to head with this, is that by statute we need to do some kind of comparative analysis between consensual and non-consensual. So that's part one. Part two, we've got a survey that we want to send out, or a number of them. And where I was trying to head, and my suggestions were, like I said, brainstorming, just kind of thinking aloud. Those were thoughts that were coming to my head, just trying to figure out where this survey might go. The idea is that we would want to structure this survey in such a way where we can get some decent information, so that we get information about consensual costs that are going to be market driven and presumably are going to reflect what carriers can bear in a market where, say, they're trying to get services and trying to set their rates in such a way that they'll get consumers to pay. And so I think we need to think hard about structuring the survey so that we get some good ways of sussing out financial information in the cases of consensual tows. And that's going to be something we need to think about. And circling back to the full strategy point here is I'm trying to think the next steps that we need to take to make this work. And so getting the survey set out, it seems to me like a prior step that needs to be taken before we get that in place is how we can locate data with regard to consensual, the costs of doing consensual tows. And so I think that's a conversation we need to start with.
What if we took the current price structure that the PUC has, which it breaks it down into your weight categories, which is pretty standardized over in the consent world as well, and we could simply send out a questionnaire that shows that weight categories, and then ask them what their prices are that they charge in each one of those categories, and we'll do law enforcement, consent, and PPI, and that they can just put in what numbers are applicable to them and see where it takes us.
Yeah, I like that. Nikki.
Quick question here, but guys, as tow proprietors, are the overhead can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Are the overhead costs any different than other traditional businesses? I mean, does your office need special functionalities? I feel like a lot of the information that I'm seeing in this spreadsheet with, the overhead, I don't feel like that's just specific to you guys. And I understand that certain garages are going to require certain land mass and lighting around it and fencing and certain structures. But outside of some of those requirements, are there differentiating factors? I mean, is your office space like just a normal office space? Could we generalize some of those cost shares?
Yeah, and I mean, other than the bulletproof glassing, I mean, other than that, I mean, it's all pretty basic: telephones, computers, desk chairs, nothing spectacular. The only thing you have to worry about is your lobby of where you have, irates coming in. Other than that, as far as furniture and stuff goes, that's all basics.
Yeah. And most, I would argue that most tow companies, like, their operating facilities are probably more basic than the average business, as far as kind of furniture and stuff around there. The other big differentiator, though, this is a difference between, non-consensual and like a consensual towing. A big differentiator is the requirement often to be manned 24/7, 365 days a year, or at least be able to release vehicles, has a dramatic increase in cost versus a business that maybe has to have people there from 8 to 5, 5 days a week. So that's one thing I would say is unique. But I mean, to be transparent, like pretty much all our costs, like each one of our costs, there's some other business that also has that cost, right? Like there's other businesses that have to store vehicles for like a junkyard, for example. There's other businesses that might have to have bulletproof glass possibly, to separate and keep their employees safe. So I think all of our costs, there's somebody who has them for sure. But there's not anyone who's like super comparable that I could think of.
Thanks, guys.
So to Mr. Pierce's earlier point, and Mr. Pierce, tell me if I'm mischaracterizing it, and Joanne had mentioned as well that she thinks that, tabling till July is probably not a good idea. I agree with that. And that we should move. And she says, someone needs to take ownership of a survey. At least as a first step, we should get a survey together. Let's at least start that, because I think we all agree that at least is a first step that we'll want to have happen. And so maybe, would anyone like to volunteer to get a survey, a first draft of a survey together? Maybe Andrea or Joanne or Michael. Would anyone like to, Mr. Connolly, would anyone like to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I can come up with some of the problems we had last time. If there's anything in particular you guys want in there, I mean, obviously we want the price between consent, non-consent, law enforcement, non-consent, PPI. I think the amount of trucks they have, I think we should leave it anonymous. I don't know if we should have their company name. Maybe that'll make them feel a little more comfortable giving the information. I don't know. What do you guys think of that?
I agree on the anonymous aspect. If we actually want real answers.
I think I would. I mean, I've participated in government surveys and policy surveys before, and I never thought to leave it anonymous unless it was like down to an individual where data really would need to be aggregated for privacy reasons. You can always put the name in there, but if you have a survey, where not all fields are required, I don't know, maybe some folks will leave it off. I don't know why we would want an anonymous survey though. And I don't want constituents or the public to question our data either.
Right.
So I think, yeah. Now, and I think we discussed this last time. So I don't know, Nate, if you can remind us what the conclusion was, but there might be a legitimate reason to withhold some details for privacy reasons or proprietary reasons. Is that correct, Nate? Some identifying information?
And I actually was going to ask Mr. Roberts what he thought about that, because obviously if this is something that's going to be data collected and then subsequently used by the task force, I would imagine we probably shouldn't be fiddling with it too much. But I also see the benefit of at least indicating when we potentially send the survey out to mention that the information might, once it's sent in, basically that their information, that they wouldn't have to be worried about their, especially considering this is financial data, that's just going to be out there for everybody to see. I guess that's, I wouldn't mind hearing Mr. Roberts' comment on that.
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I think that getting the documents and then, as you said, fiddling with it, as long as we keep the original documents and that all is publicly available, you know, so if we're taking information and then doing something with it, that we keep the original somewhere there so that we can provide both what we got and what we fiddled.
And I guess my point was, yeah, I guess my point was that it'd probably be, we might get better data from these tow carriers or the industry as a whole if they weren't worried about their data just hanging out there for anybody to see, that where basically the data they're providing, their financial data, is specifically tied to their company. I think that would be if that's the case and that's what we have to do, then I think we're going to get less responses that way, honestly.
But I definitely understand and I'm sensitive to that. But, you know, I think there's also a way to couch the survey intro as we're collecting this data, you know, and we're evaluating our current rates to see if they're appropriate, you know, and there's a way to message it, right? Like if you participate, it's going to be of, you know, like potential benefit, right, to you as a business owner. I am uncomfortable with us allowing anonymized data, particularly if there is ever going to be a question, or could possibly be a question of public trust. But Mr. Roberts, did you say that we could withhold like names if something were queried because it would be proprietary, or is that a gray area as long as we kept the information? Because we can, if we could withhold names in that event, that's maybe something we could say up front, right? That we collect this data, but I think there's a way to message it. I just really am hesitant about anonymized data, especially over something that, you know, while we all might have great intentions, like has been a hot button issue the last couple of years. I don't want anyone to question it. You know, even if we
my off-the-cuff response is I think Cora would allow proprietary information or sensitive financial data for individual companies to be redacted even under a Cora request. But that's subject to me looking back at Cora. It's been a little while since I've dug into the exceptions.
And I guess the way I would looked at it as we would request the information, they would send it in and it wouldn't be anonymized coming to us. But then what we would do is then just aggregate it and put it into, again, this spreadsheet or whatever we're going to end up using to produce this more general scope information. It will still have the data that's not aggregate and not anonymized, but I get where you're coming from, Joyanne, and I definitely hear that.
I'm in agreement with you, Nate. I apologize. I misunderstood. I thought we were going to allow some like anonymous information, but now I understand, and I'm in agreement that we should aggregate it for sure. And I think if we have concerns about folks giving this data, there is again, I think, a way to phrase the introduction, like maybe to ease some of those concerns. And but I apologize, I misunderstood, in which case I'm in agreement with you, Nate.
Okay.
So I want to make sure I'm glad y'all agree, but I want to make sure I understand how y'all agree. So Joyanne, what you're saying that you think would be acceptable is if it wasn't anonymized in the sense that, like, when someone answered the survey, they said, hey, this is, Jim Bob's Towing from Grand Junction or whatever. And then I'm answering these questions, but that information wasn't turned around and released to the public as Jim Bob from Towing from Grand Junction said he had this much revenue and this is the percent of tows that he towed and et cetera, that you're okay with that not being released to general public, but that the initial data request would include his or that company's identity attached to that information. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, correct. And I think
Gotcha.
I think that's appropriate and in line with similar things I've seen with different agencies. I think that would be, for me, speaking only for myself, I would be very comfortable with that. I think it's appropriate and fair.
Yeah, I think if you did that, and like you're saying during like the beginning, you said very clearly, like, hey, like your data in individual form is not being released to the public, et cetera, et cetera. You might get some people who didn't want to participate because of that, but I don't think it like everyone wouldn't. I think if you told them that, I think if you said, hey, we're taking this information and we want your info attached to it and we're going to release it to the general public, you're probably going to get a lot of people not want to respond, as you might imagine. So I agree with all that. I don't have a strong opinion or anything, but that makes sense.
That's why I thought what like Michael was saying is just, let's just keep it to the basics that doesn't scare people to answer. You know, I mean, what do you charge for consent tow? I mean, that's you can call them on the phone and get that answer, you know?
Yeah. Mr. Pierce.
Thanks. Another issue, and I don't think we can work with it this round, but because we've brought up some needs for various data last session too. I was thinking if I think it's within our purview to do this, but to recommend a rule change that because we need this data and because it's fairly essential for the regulatory system to work well, that supplying the data might be a requirement of having a license. And I'm thinking that might be a fairly good recommendation for a rule change if we can get it. Just because
I like that.
Without that data,
Yeah.
we are going to get unrepresentative samples. We're going to get responses from people who are comfortable, and the people who aren't going to give us the data. That's going to be a biased data set. So
Yeah, as someone in the industry, I would support that for sure. I mean, I think if you want a towing permit,
Oh yeah.
there's nothing wrong with you being required to provide the regulators with some data like that. Mr. Roberts, but maybe Mr. Roberts might say that that's not possible. I don't know.
I'm sorry. You know what, Trevor? I was looking at the Cora and not listening to Michael. So what was the
right.
question?
So, Mr. Pierce, correct me if I'm mischaracterized, but basically saying like, hey, on an ongoing basis, it might be useful for the task force and the PUC to have good up-to-date data on tow companies and types of tows they're doing and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That is it within the realm of possibility for there to be a rule change of some kind that said, if you want a towing permit, when you get it renewed, you need to respond to these questions and provide some data on, a variety of topics or whatever. Is that within the realm of something that could be done?
You could, yeah. As far as this task force, you can make a recommendation to the PUC to implement a rule change. So totally. And while I have the floor, I was looking at Cora, which is the Colorado Open Records Act, and the information, confidential, trade secret, privileged information, and confidential commercial or financial information.
I think we lost Mr. Roberts.
oh no.
No, he was just getting good.
Yeah.
All right, we'll see when he.
Hey, Nate, how hard would it be to add some questions to the renewal that you do online? Like when you renew your permit every year online, couldn't you just put some couple basic little questions on there?
So we've gone through some exercises of late, trying to update our online application processes, which is how most applications come in, as people use our online functionality through our website to apply for permits, to renew permits. A lot of carriers do that, not just in towing, but across the board. And so, we've had to tweak some of them lately based on legislation and some other things that we've needed to change in the process. It has not been as easy as I would have hoped to do that. As people are talking about these, requesting this information as part of the permit, I can tell you that as part of a separate regulated transportation industry, specifically CPCNs, we have a rule that requires them to file annual reports that have a lot of this kind of financial data. Obviously, we don't have those same rules for other types of carriers. I'm not sure if there would be some issue applying that. I can't say for sure. I just know that that is a rule that we have, and reports that we require certain types of carriers to provide us with on an annual basis. I'm not sure, at least at first glance, I don't know the practicality of applying something like that to the towing industry. I wouldn't imagine it would be a huge issue as long as the commissioners agreed with doing that. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept that I hadn't really thought about before, doing it through that kind of a lens. But
I just figured that'd be the simplest way from a tower's aspect, just asking basic questions. What's your current consent rate and your, current non-consent rate or whatever. And we could ask them just basic information at the renewal point, then you'd have it, bam, and it'd be easy to do.
Yeah. I think, I love that. Mr. Pierce, I think that's a great idea. And I think putting that in whatever report we provided the PUC, a recommendation, I think that's completely within the scope of what we recommend, because it has to do with rates, saying that, like, look, for future reference, asking these questions and requiring a response on, very general data for permit renewal will help us and the PUC do their job. That seems within the scope. So I think that'd be great if we end up putting that in the report. So,
Yeah.
All right. So we're getting a little close to ending up.
Actually, John's back. Could we see if we could get summary from John again?
Oh yeah, real quick. So I'm not sure where you lost me, but I was going to give you an answer to the question earlier about privileged information. I know Colorado Open Records Act, privileged confidential financial trade secret information, all of that material, all the information in material can be redacted. I think we'd have no problem. I'd be able to defend it with a straight face, and that's kind of my rubric. Like, can I defend this argument with a straight face? I can do that. Privileged information about a company's data, their charges, whatever it is, we can redact all that.
Awesome. Okay. So here's what I would propose. I think it'd be good if Mr. Connolly and maybe two other folks independently came up with a proposed list of survey questions that we could take a look at those three and first thing in our next meeting, first thing on the agenda item after administrative stuff, is we get together and kind of combine those and come up with something that we can kind of vote on and at least mostly agree on as far as the survey questions. But I think it'd be good to have, Mr. Connolly, because he knows the industry super well, but maybe two other people to get some input into that. Would anyone be willing to do that and then submit that before our next meeting?
Can I request?
Yes.
Can I request Nikki and Michael for that?
I think that'd be awesome. What do you say, Nikki and Michael?
I'm considering how to reach out to you, but yeah, I'm open to it. Do you want like email? Well, you've got our board email, but I check that when my phone makes me.
I think that's awesome. I think just, the general draft, and then maybe send it to me and Nate, and then we can include with the agenda and everything for the next meeting, so everyone can see that, hey, this is Nikki's ideas for this before we have that meeting. And then we'll have Mr. Connolly's, and I see Joanne's hand. Maybe Joanne, are you volunteering?
I was misunderstanding. I'm sorry. I thought it was a work group. Sorry, guys.
Oh, no, I was.
Yeah. Nobody
Okay.
wants me to volunteer, Trevor. Don't be silly. No, I was gonna ask that clarifying question if it's a work group, and then I was gonna say, if we're doing stuff via email, is it possible to get a working doc like in Google Docs so that folks can see it and that the rest of the team has time to process before our next meeting? It was a suggestion, a tech, and maybe and Mr. Roberts might want to weigh into on open records and how that works, or if that helps our groups.
I'll say what I think, but then I'll tell Mr. Roberts to tell us what the truth is. Just for ease, like I think if we had a Google Doc, that's kind of an ongoing working thing between members of the task force. And I think if we did that, we'd have to have a way for basically the public to all have access to that Google Doc too, which I don't know is practical. And so I think probably the the easiest thing to do, and it's transparent because it's going to be posted online, is that for the folks that are coming up with proposed survey questions, to do that by themselves independently, not talking to anyone else, and then send that to myself and Nate, or just Nate. And then we include that with the agenda items, including the minutes from this meeting on the next one. And then Nate can post that online. And then the public, and no one's working with each other outside of a public setting. And the things that people individually come up with are have kind of like the light of day and everyone can see it. Mr. Roberts, is that correct?
It's 100% correct. Thanks, Trevor.
Okay, awesome. But is that a volunteer, Joanne? You're gonna write up some survey questions for us?
I can contribute to the story questions, and then
Awesome.
since I was voluntold and I totally deserved it, Trevor, I'd also put out there that, like, if we can, let's try to get them done within a couple of weeks so that the rest of so everyone else can process and have time before our next meeting.
Okay, awesome.
So that, like, we don't turn it in 3 days before our next meeting, but let's try
Yeah.
to do it within 2 weeks of today.
You guys want to have another meeting this month?
I will, but I know everyone's busy, so.
I think that if
willing.
we're going to get a survey out in time and process it before we get a decision, I think we need to start moving as soon as we can. Yeah, my own sense is I'm trying to get I'm finishing up with some windstorm disaster work, and so I'm still really burdened with other stuff at the moment. So it's going to be hard for me to do more than kind of casual, some casual input. So I'm happy to do as much as I can. I just can't promise that high level of quality for a little bit.
Okay. So we got Joanne and Mr. Connolly, or get some draft survey questions together. I think if anyone else gets a wild hair and just gets super excited and would like to do that as well and send that to us, please do. I want to get as much input from everyone as possible, so we have a fair and broad set of questions to send out in the survey. So right now I got Mr. Connolly and Ms. Rusha volunteering to get that together. It's open to the group, and then we'll post that before the next meeting. So great. All right, we got 3 minutes left.
Great.
I don't see anybody, unless I'm missing something. We don't have any public comment folks signed up, correct, Mr. Riley?
Yeah, nobody had signed up. I actually have the sheet open right now. There's still no responses even through the course of our meeting. What I was just going to say is, yeah, if the individuals who are going to work on these draft surveys, if you want to send it to me, I can go ahead and circulate it to the whole group, or like I said, if we want to splice that with the agenda for our next meeting, I can add it onto that so that everybody can see it, and it would be on the website, so it would be public, all that. So I guess yeah, it would just depend. So it looks like if we're going to keep our regular trend, that would have us meeting again on the 13th of July, second Tuesday of the month. Again, I know a few of you have mentioned meeting kind of in between those. I'm guessing that would make it sometime on the 22nd or the 29th is kind of the in between this date and the 13th. So yeah, I'm on board with whatever you all want to do. But yeah, when it comes to, I agree with Joyanne, and that's why I raised my hand in the first place. I agree that, we should give, once these drafts are put together, we should give people, other members of the task force, some time to digest it and kind of get their feelings on it, so that we can, at the very least, at our next primary meeting in July, put all the finer points on that, and that way it's ready to go. By that point, I should have everything in place to do the listserv and blast it out to the towing industry. So that way we're maximizing the time.
Okay,
Sounds great to me.
good to me as well. So and it's July 13th, Nate, you said?
If we're keeping on the trend of the second Tuesday of the month, yes.
Yeah,
13th.
unless someone disagrees, I would say that.
The second Wednesday, by the way.
Oh, yeah, second.
Oh yeah, excuse me. Yes, second Wednesday. Sorry.
Oh, Joanne, your hand's up.
Hey, so if since I heard people say that they were willing to meet in the interim, sorry to throw a monkey wrench in our clothes, but like Nate, I know this is asking more of you and your time, but do you think it would be beneficial if we had, you know, one meeting we can notice it of the folks who volunteered to write some questions, and then we pull up that Google Doc and we just start throwing it in there. You know what I mean? And then we could, I feel like we could be pretty efficient with our time and get something out, you know, for folks to review in advance of our regular meeting.
Yeah, it's up to you all what you want to do. If you want me to, you know, get all the administrative pieces in place for a work group in between now and July 13th, just let me know when and how, and I'll do it.
Okay, I want to be sensitive to your time because I know we asked a lot, but I think Nicole did have a good idea about having a work group. I'm willing to do, I'll do whatever the consensus is between the other, you know, with the other folks who also offered to at least get a survey going, some questions going. So I'll join the consensus. I prefer a work group, but I'm cool with whatever.
So it almost sounds, sorry, Trevor. It sounds like maybe the people who are going to be doing the drafts of the survey, I can create a notice and a meeting for just those people. Obviously, anyone else on the task force who wants to listen in, I'll invite everyone, and whoever wants to come can come. But yeah, it's like I said, if we want to keep on the trend of Wednesdays, it sounds like that would probably need to occur on the 22nd or the 29th. So just let me know what time and which day, and I'll take care of everything on the administrative side.
I'm open the 22nd.
Yeah. How about this? What about Wednesday in July? So our official normal scheduled meeting, we have that. And then Nate, why don't, if anyone's opposed, 2 weeks, same time, same day, 2 weeks from now, we have a work group meeting, and whoever wants to participate.
Could I suggest 3 weeks out? Because that would be something that I could potentially do, but 2 weeks out is going to be really tough for me.
That would be the 29th.
I could do the 29th.
Yeah.
Works for me.
I
Okay.
also
Do you want to make it the same 2 to 4 or different time frame?
Let's just stick with the same.
Okay. All right. I will go ahead. I'll send out invites for both of those within the next week. I'm blocking them off on my calendar right now. So this is the workshop. Okay. So I have the workshop June 29th, 2 to 4 p.m. And then our next regularly scheduled meeting, July 13th, also Wednesday, 2 to 4 p.m. And I'll send out invites on both.
Okay, awesome. I got hand up for Mr. Prunsky and then Joyanne.
If anybody, I'm having a hard time finding the old stuff. If anybody could email that, a copy of that, that'd be awesome.
Sorry, I couldn't hear that. What was it?
You're really faint.
The old survey.
Oh,
Sorry. The old survey.
So have you opened up the chat? Have you, sorry, Officer Runsky, have you opened up the chat on the bottom right, the little chat box bubble, and then scrolled to the top and clicked on that link? Did you do that? Yeah. There should be only one link in the chat at the very top.
It's a Google Drive.
Yeah, you're cutting out a little bit. I don't know if you're seeing that, but yeah, that's where all the documentation is.
Okay, I got it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Joanne, did you still have something? I saw your hand up, but now it's not.
No, I apologize. I had just left it up from before.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, everybody. It's 4:04. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
L2.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.